Okay, in this video, I'm going to come back to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, the reason why I'm going to do this is because I'm so passionate about the myth about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm so passionate about some of the lies surrounding the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and actually what makes MMA fighters good and to what degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu actually contributes to mixed martial arts that I haven't really broken down in a very cohesive way, a very simple way, and convincing way what my issues are with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and what people need to look for. Now, I want to say this. There are people who say I hate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I don't hate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, okay? I hate what American martial arts has done to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Rickson Gracie and Royce Gracie happen to be two of my favorite people. I would love to talk to Rickson. I think I have a lot in common with Rickson. Royce is one of my favorite martial artists for several reasons. One is because he's totally against this sport, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but also he's someone who's pro-Palestinian, from what I understand, and I don't know if he's converted to Islam, but I know that he is someone who respects my religion, Islam. So it's not that I don't like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, believe it or not. I do believe that what you should be studying, if you're going to study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, more than no-ghi, is actually gi. Why? Because it helps you to manipulate clothing. I also think that if it comes down to chokes and comes down to arm bars or leg blocks, I think leg blocks is ridiculous to be trying to practice if you're calling yourself training for self-defense. I think that if you're going to really be training for self-defense, you should be working on chokes, whether it's no-gi chokes or lapel chokes with the kimono. So I'm not in opposition to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I am in opposition to the American hijacking of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I want to make that perfectly clear. Okay. But I'm going to also, what I want to say though, before I begin, is that there are people who think that it's rather odd that me, as a black man, is talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, why is that? Well, that's because most people don't understand the origins of martial arts. They don't understand some of the greatest fighters in martial arts. Most people don't even remember Maurice Smith. Maurice Smith was the first striker that really survived wrestling. If you really want to look at a great guard, Maurice Smith, a predominantly striker, had a better guard than 99% of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artists. Why? It was a wrestling guard. It was a catch wrestling guard, right? But if you look at Maurice Smith, a black kickboxer, had a better guard than 99% of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. To be honest with you, Frank Shamrock had the best guard I've ever seen. And it was a wrestling guard. It was a catch wrestling guard. It wasn't Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Okay? Frank Shamrock, who was taught to kickbox by Maurice Smith. Now I'm going to break down what my issues are with how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is what? How Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is pushed on the public. So let's begin. First and foremost, when we look at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, okay, we have to understand there is no-gi and there's gi. There is no-gi, and then there is gi. That's number one. You have to understand that. No-gi, and then there's gi. Okay. Number two, it is a gi art. And I will repeat myself so you people know exactly what I'm saying. So for you people who say, okay, he's redundant, don't watch the video then. If you think it's redundant, if you have an issue with me repeating myself, you need to shut up and listen. But if you find that you can't do that, don't listen to the video, don't subscribe, go somewhere else. Sometimes I have to repeat myself so you people understand what I'm saying. Okay, so it is no-gi, you have no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you have gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right, 60% of the techniques of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu you can't do without the gi. 60% of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques you really can't do without the gi. I will go further and say that almost 90% of techniques in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu you do differently with the gi. 90%. That's right, almost 100% of techniques in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? I don't care if the curriculum is 600 techniques or 300 techniques, depending on what lineage you're training with or from. But when you look at gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, almost 90%, I think as much as 90% of the techniques in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are done differently when you have a gi on. And that's how much the gi impacts the game or the art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or the practice of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, you have no-gi and you have gi. Okay. You must understand this because there are people who will say that MMA fighters have a blue belt or purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And they are wrestlers. They are primarily wrestlers. But when they come into the UFC, you will hear people say they have a blue belt or purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What they don't tell you is that they have a blue belt or purple belt that was given to them in no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Let me repeat that. When you see people and they say, well, they have a blue belt or purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but you know that they were wrestlers when they came into the UFC, they're NCAA wrestlers, okay? Like, people like Bo Nickal. When you hear people say they have blue belts and purple belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you need them to understand they have blue belts and purple belts in no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Not gi, in no-gi. Now, it's important for you to understand that. And let me slow down so you understand, so you can get this. Them having a blue belt or purple belt in no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is far different than them having a blue belt or purple belt in gi. The reason is because no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is as much as 50% wrestling. I'm going to say that again. It's important to understand. It's important to know that these wrestlers like Bo Nickal and Khamzat Chimaev who get blue belts and purple belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you need to understand that it is easy for them to get those belts because in no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, half of it is wrestling. In fact, most of what you do on your feet in no-gi is wrestling. Let me say it again. Most of what you do on your feet in no-gi is wrestling. You hear people talk about John Danaher, right? What John Danaher does on his feet is all wrestling. What John Danaher, that's right, I'm repeating myself so you people know this. No one's going to tell you this. But John Danaher, this brilliant man, right? Brilliant man, right? What he does on his feet is wrestling. So what are some of the techniques, right, that no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu takes from wrestling? Well, the arm drag, the whizzer, the seat belt, the neck snaps, the single legs, the double legs, the duck unders, all of those things, right, are taken right from wrestling and adapted by no-gi. So what happens is, when people like Bo Nickal and Khamzat Chimaev are promoted to blue belt and purple belt, they are actually being promoted to blue belt and purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for their wrestling and not for their gi work. I'm going to say this again. Because no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is 50% wrestling, right? And almost everything that is done on the feet in no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is wrestling. Because of that, wrestlers are given blue belts and purple belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for really, in effect, wrestling well. Okay? Wrestling well. This is my major issue when people like Joe Rogan say someone is a blue belt or purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They are a blue belt or purple belt in no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is 50% wrestling in total, and on its feet, it is at least 80% wrestling. It doesn't start doing BJJ until it's on the ground. If you're doing no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you really are not doing Jiu-Jitsu until you were on the ground. Almost everything you're doing on your feet is taken from Greco-Roman or freestyle wrestling. Period. So the whole idea that a wrestler is a blue belt or purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right, should be said and should be jotted down with asterisks. Asterisks. Now, when you look at no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that has been highly infused with wrestling, it will look different than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu no-gi that is not infused with wrestling or not infused with a lot of wrestling. Example, the greatest grappler that I've ever seen is not Gordon Ryan, cheater and steroid junkie that he is. No, it's Marcelo Garcia. The best mixing of wrestling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is seen in, I believe, is the Michael Jordan of grappling, and that is Marcelo Garcia. When you look at his wrestling, or when you look at his BJJ or his no-gi, you see it how wrestling and BJJ is perfectly fused together. If you want to see BJJ, that the no-gi BJJ that is not infused with wrestling, almost a pure kind of no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? You see Rickson, that you have to see Rickson. How do you really look? What's the first thing you look for? Takedowns. Because in no-gi, with no-gi that is highly infused with wrestling, you will see arm drags, but you will see the single leg inside trip, single leg outside trip. You will see double legs. You will see high crotches, right? You will see classic Greco-Roman, but more than that, freestyle wrestling takedowns. When you see takedowns in a more pure form of no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like a Rickson no-gi, right? And by the way, he shied away from wrestling because Helio had a big issue with Polis infusing wrestling, and he had a big issue with Carlson Gracie infusing wrestling into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And as a very loyal son, Rickson really refused to infuse wrestling into his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So when you look at a pure kind of no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can look at their takedowns. What are the takedowns when you look at a pure kind of no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like that displayed by Rickson? What you see are these crude, what you see are the basic body blocks of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You see body blocks. You see the body block with the head inside, body lock with the head outside. You see these body locks where the basic takedowns are: you get the body lock, you fold the body down, and you take them down by folding the body, folding through the midsection and putting your weight on and dropping them. Or you will see them get a full body lock and get a trip. Okay, they will fold the body, and if the person is resistant, they will get a trip. But it's very crude. The takedowns are very crude, and most of them that you see in pure no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are really the couple body blocks that were in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in those old videos where Horion is fighting different martial arts. That's the number one way to tell. The number one way to tell the difference between highly infused with wrestling no-gi and no-gi that is not infused are basically the takedowns. The takedowns in highly infused no-gi are the takedowns of freestyle wrestling. Okay, again, single legs, inside, outside trip, double legs, high crotch, those kind of takedowns. Okay. When you see the pure no-gi, you will see the takedowns, the primitive, the very basic takedowns, the body blocks, the folding of the body, the trip, the folding, and then the trip to help the person go down, to aid in taking that person down. And where you see this no-gi, the pure no-gi, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with almost no wrestling, you see that with Rickson Gracie. Okay. So now we understand, okay, that my major issue when we look at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the hustle of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is people not really saying that it's a no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that they are awarding a belt in to Bo Nickal, or it's no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that they are giving belts in to people like Khamzat Chimaev. That is the major issue of the black belt for Alex Pereira. This kind of thing. They're not telling you that. Why? Because they don't want you to do an investigation and realize that what I am telling you is true, which is 50% of no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is wrestling. And 90%, at least 90% of what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does on its feet is wrestling, where the only time they're really using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is once they hit the mat. Okay. So now, how can you know if a person really has been given a black belt that they earned, or a purple belt that they earned, or a brown belt that they earned? The way to know is to see their gi work, is to see them roll in the gi. That's it. Tyron Woodley, if he's a black belt, you should see him show that, manifest that in his gi work. If Daniel Cormier is a real black belt, you should see Daniel Cormier wrestle. You should see him not wrestle. You should see him roll and manifest a good black belt, top game, bottom game, half guard game, De La Riva guard game, whatever it is. You should see him manifest that black belt in the gi. Same thing with Cain Velasquez. We need to understand Conor McGregor has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now imagine, Conor McGregor has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm asking you people, how much gi work do you think he's really done? Even in no-gi, if I was just to say, okay, he can be a black belt in no-gi, Conor McGregor, do you really think he's an authentic black belt in even no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? No, he's not. He's not. So what is my issue? My issue are the lies that they tell people, that the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community has continued to tell people, and the lies that Joe Rogan has continued to help give strength to. And that is that NCAA wrestlers are good because they have belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. NCAA wrestlers are good because they are wrestlers. And the belts that they have in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are given to them in no-gi, not gi. And those belts are given to them because, one, they are hard to submit, and the takedowns that are generally in no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are mastered already by NCAA wrestlers before they take their first class in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That is not told to the people. My second issue is that they don't tell you that they're given belts in no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but their gi work, which is actually the meat of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That is the telltale sign, the excellence of a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner is how good they are in the gi. They do not want to show you the lack of gi skills by the people, of the people that they give these belts to. The next thing, they do not want to tell you that they give black belts, gift black belts to good grapplers. They gave a black belt to Josh Barnett. They gave a black belt to Sakuraba. They give black belts to wrestlers. And they give black belts even to strikers like Alex Pereira. They give them black belts without having much, if at all, any experience in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Okay? And lastly, they do not want to tell you that most of these people they promote to blue and purple and brown and black belts have no gi work worth looking at. They have virtually no gi work. None. And if you are a brown belt and a black belt and a purple belt, even a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you really have earned that belt, and that belt is to mean something, you should have no-gi and gi skills. Now, you can be better at one, and if you're a wrestler, you're probably going to be better at no-gi than gi. But you should have gi skills to display that manifest the belt that you're wearing around your waist. Those are the major issues I have with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, not with the Gracies. See you next video.